Welcome back to Simon and White and the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian White and joined as always by Mark Simon. Mark, there's an awfully interesting piece out in the New York Times. Can you give us a recap about what the topic is?
It's actually a pretty incredible piece that this piece actually got through, that actually an editor let a young writer put this out and then basically let it go. Ashley Wong has written a piece about what Eileen Gu, the young Chinese-American double gold medalist, one silver medalist, excellent athlete, what it means to young Chinese Americans, and how they identify with her that they're Chinese and they're part American and they don't want to be held in accountability to either side. In other words, that I'm Chinese when I'm there, I'm American when I'm here. I could walk any one of those people back in about 3 seconds, because basically, if you want to know that, it's disgusting. I mean, it's basically, I am who I am. I love who I am. And I have no loyalty to anybody. If you're Chinese, I mean, I'd probably be sitting next to like the panda. You know what I'm saying? A panda would agree with me on this. It is ridiculous. It is a selfish, literally all about me, all about nothing but selfishness. I don't want Eileen Gu judged because maybe you're going to judge me. It's really an awful thing. And I don't like her being judged because maybe it'll come over to me. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm an Arab American. You know what I'm saying? We've been getting it for 50 years now since the PLO. It's part of life. It's part of life. You identify yourself and your country by what you accept, but also what you leave behind. Okay, we are a nation of immigrants. You don't get to pull it with you. I'm sorry. Right. It's just the nature of the beast. And if you want to pull it with you, then you are lesser than us. We can treat you as lesser than us because you're not coming along on our grand experiment anymore. You've decided that you're going to sit on your own little island. It's actually an awful, awful position, and it's shockingly self-absorbed by these young, probably very wealthy or upper middle class young women who have no clue whatsoever, of the people.
Right. No, so it's not shocking that this comes from the New York Times with their warped view, their racist views, their racial obsession, their globalist citizen of the world stuff. Do you think this is being reflected by athletes who are U.S. athletes at the Olympics who may be either born in China but are U.S. citizens, or ethnically Chinese but U.S. citizens, or is the media running with it?
Mm-hmm. No, this is all a response. I mean, I hate to say it, the whole athlete is like Tucker Carlson said something bad against her, so therefore we have to react. This is spoiled child things. I mean, look, I'm the parent of I have two Chinese American kids. My wife's Filipino. The kids that I consider nieces to me are Chinese from, from so many times overseas. For Christ's sakes, everybody knows my background. I work for Apple Daily. There's people's kids who I look after who are Chinese. I'm appalled and I'm losing my mind at the Chinese elites who essentially decide that they're not going to say anything against crime in New York City because they don't want to offend their other, person of color political allies. Andrew Yang basically just tweeted out some ridiculous thing about school choice in San Francisco, how they shouldn't have rejected these 3 people and rather they should basically, Chinese parents shouldn't be so angry. It's ridiculous. I cannot stand these elite left-wing leaders of the Asian community who are essentially leaving these people out to be assaulted on the streets because they would rather be with the no bail squad. Well, this young woman, Ashley Wong, and her position on this is essentially telling everybody that, hey, we're not with you, Americans. We are who we are in our own individual world. And you know what? I bet you won't find 15 minutes of public service on any of these young women from what I read. Right. Seriously. I mean by that, like a volunteer fire department, any military service. My son is named after a great Chinese American. His name is Chu En Lee. He's the most decorated U.S. Marine in the history of the Marine Corps, decorated Chinese Marine in the history of the United States. But my point is, we've always had voices like this, okay, in our society. But imagine it's 1939 and the German-American Friendship Society said, hey, when I'm in Germany, I feel like a Nazi, and when I'm here, I feel like a Nazi.
That's right.
Look, here's the other thing with Elaine Gu. Imagine it's the Miracle on Ice, and the guy playing across from the Russian team is Bob Slavinsky, from Brooklyn, New York, from New York, or from Canton, Ohio, and he's decided not to play for the U.S. hockey team, but to play for the Russians, against the Lake Placid Miracle on Ice team. It's just, this. This is fantasy, and it's an infantile article that it's so a me, and they're not
Right.
part of us. Ashley Wong
Well,
is
and
telling us that she's not
you have
part of
such a
us.
good vantage on the situation. You mentioned you have two adopted Chinese, now Chinese American, longtime Chinese American now children. You're married to a Filipino woman, and it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, this plays directly into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, because their view is whether
Yes.
you are born and you moved and you got U.S. or other foreign citizenship doesn't matter. If you're ethnically Chinese and have never set foot in China, doesn't matter. I remember a story, guy who runs a significant business association in Los Angeles, born in California. His parents are from Hong Kong. And the Chinese, I don't know if it was the consul general or another official at the Chinese consulate in LA, introduced himself to this guy, and he knew that his parents chose the Hong Kong colonial passport, the British issued overseas passport at the handover instead of the Chinese passport, meaning, hey, you may think you're American, you may have been born in America, but you're Chinese. We know all about you. We know what we don't like about you and what we do like about you, and keep in mind that you're ours. So do you see this sort of viewpoint from the New York Times, from this columnist, Ashley Wong, as
I
sort of reflective of that?
I can assure you exactly the Chinese are saying thank you for this piece. Look, to be bluntly honest with you, then if you accept her logic, then well, I'm a researcher at UCLA and I've decided that I'm working on nuclear fission stuff, and basically who gets it is the highest bidder because it works for me. I'm working on secret stuff that's basically, I'm going to develop it, medical research. I'm going to give it to the highest bidder. That's essentially the logic. It's an incredibly amoral position that this young woman actually went. And you know what? I'm getting a little damn tired of every single time we criticize somebody, they run and they hide behind, oh, she's a young woman. The China group is the worst. The China hands, all these white guys, all these guys who have, oh, you shouldn't attack her. Oh, it's racism. Oh, it's mean. Stop it. Okay? You entered into a debate about a serious matter and a serious subject. And these young people are telling us, they are telling us that essentially they are not with us, that they will choose at the time of their choice, they are not with us. Ashley Wong, every white friend, every black friend, every Hispanic friend of Ashley Wong should look at her and they should say, Ashley Wong says, I'm Chinese when I'm in China, I'm American when I'm here, and I will pick. And when I'm Chinese, I'm not with you. We don't have that luxury. It's the myth about African Americans and overseas immigrants.
Right.
African Americans have been part of this country and part of our struggle for years. Okay. And a lot of Chinese Americans have. But something's happened in this whole recent immigrant wave in the last 35 years. I call it the 747 immigrants. And I'm sorry to keep going on this. But basically, it's the idea that you can pop back and forth and you can have dual identities. That's fine. And that works when you're at the Asia Society or the World Economic Forum. But don't think that you're a player in our society now. You are nothing more than someone we have to keep an eye on. In other words,
Well,
imagine the logic that she has.
mm-hmm. How
Her
broad
logic
is
is
this? I
basically
mean, so I've
justification.
had the luck of dealing with Asian Americans, whether they're immigrants or whether they're born here, but from an ethnicity, say Korean, Taiwanese in particular. I've dealt with those groups. Now, granted, I've dealt with more conservative groups, people who care about North Korean human rights, or Taiwanese who tend to be the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is at least strong on China, against China, I should say, or against the CCP. So these groups are remarkably patriotic. They, of course, identify themselves as American, even if they have some interest and vestige in the culture that they left or that their family, their forebears left. But they would never say anything like this. But are you saying that this is a majority of newer arrivals, or just a very loud minority of new arrivals, the 747 cohort you're talking about?
I think there's no doubt the vast majority of Chinese Americans um, do not feel this way. There's no doubt about it. Why do I know this? Because basically, two Chinese American guys sent it to me, and go and just basically, face plant. I can't believe that they wrote this stuff. Only the New York Times. It's clickbait as much as anything. I'm sure they wrote it. I'm sure Ashley Wong was like, "Oh, my friends feel this way. We don't feel we should be, picking on this young woman." In other words, what it is they're spoiled rotten. Ashley Wong and her friends are spoiled rotten brats. Excuse me, spoiled rotten brats who basically just don't want to be judged. And that's all this piece is like, we feel that we shouldn't have to live by the rules that everybody else lives by. None of these women will ever do service for America. None of these people will ever do anything when they say this. They are basically non-entities. And in a way, you now see why the Chinese American leadership basically has to go other places for their support. In other words, they are not able to discuss certain things in their community. I can't believe Andrew Yang would read this and say, "Hey, this is a good place for us to be." I can't believe even Ted Lieu or Judy Chu would say, "Hey, this is a good place to be." But the problem is they also wouldn't say, "Hey, this is wrong." Okay? They wouldn't come out and say, "This is not what you should be writing about." Instead, they're going to go the "you go, we're all in this together" type ridiculous stuff. But I have to tell you, it is so depressing, because you really see that basically, I'm not talking about bad things that happen, but you see that they're not in it with us. I mean, they basically just told us they're not part of us, that they're not with us, that essentially they're going to do what they want to do. And God help if anybody criticized this young woman. So, in other words, what they're telling us really in that article is they're going with racial solidarity. That's what the column is. The end of this thing is about racial solidarity, because they're saying they're claiming, it's this bizarre thing where they're claiming that they're being, that Asians are being persecuted like this. Like I said, imagine if it's 1936 and you decide to say, "Hey, I'm a German American when I'm in Germany, and I'm an American when I'm in America," and then wear that position in 1942.
Right. Well, you alluded to this earlier, where
Yeah.
they're sort of saying Asian Americans are under attack, so here's our solution, which is to be less American. But just to put the hammer on the nail, basically, is the reality that a lot of these crimes that target Asian Americans
Yeah.
specifically are being perpetrated by often bums in cities
Sure.
like New York and LA and San Francisco, and the perpetrator is almost always black, and we can't talk about that. But frankly, the Asian American community might be better served to talk about that, or talk about what's really going on here. That it's not,
Yeah.
I think they're trying to, they tried to insinuate that this was somehow Donald Trump's rhetoric that was about the coronavirus that was generating hate attacks against Asian Americans. And if you look at the actual perpetrators, these are not people wearing MAGA hats.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, look, the narrative that they've wanted, the narrative that they've always wanted, it like there's some guy driving around Manhattan, you know what I'm saying, at 3 in the morning with a MAGA hat on, and then the LBJ, I mean, L whatever it is, let's go Brandon, or whatever it is, flag on the back of his truck, jumping out and smashing old Asian women. No, it's been almost universally African Americans who've been involved in these violence attacks, but not African Americans, homeless, drug addicts, career criminals, thugs. And the fact of the matter is, the only way you stop that is basically through strong street policing. No, get rid of these no bail crimes. But that's the problem. The problem you have is you'll never hear a word really, of much of anything from Asian American leaders. And the reason why you won't hear that word is because that messes with their alliance with all the other people on the left. So it's one of these really strange things where the Asian Americans have put themselves into bed with the other groups through their democratic elites, and basically they're coming to, it's just amazing. They're complaining about things. It's like going, we don't have this problem for the most part in red America. In other words, um, there's not guys driving up and down the streets of Georgia, okay, driving up and down the suburbs around Georgia, basically hunting Asians. Okay, we have bad things that happen everywhere, but really it comes down to you've got to be strong on crime, against crime, and they are not, and their leadership is left hanging. But I
Right.
just have to tell you, this was such a depressing piece. I know, I fully get it. They don't want to get lectured about some spoiled, rotten little girl who's flipping out on doing circles in the sky above, the ski village that nobody cares about. More people watch the Purdue Indiana game than watch Eileen Gu, do her thing in the U.S. Nobody cares, okay, about her, and they don't want to get the grief for it. But the problem is like this complete overreaction of trying to use it to somehow justify their existence. Anyway, I'm done with that rant and rave, and I hope people aren't too upset with me over it. But it's ridiculous. It's awful.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we said, please subscribe to us, leave us a comment on Apple, or definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks. We'll be back again soon with another episode of Simon and Mike.